Broadcasting from the studios of Business RadioX, it's time for LaserLife Insights. This show is brought to you by Sumas Medical Laser, changing lives with the power of light. Now, here's your host, Pete Cousins.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of LaserLife Insights. I'm broadcasting live from the Atlanta International Airport today, so I'm just passing through for a minute, and we thought a perfect time to do a show. So shout out to John Ray and Business RadioX for putting this show together. We appreciate you very much. And with that, I would like to introduce our two guests this afternoon, two good friends of ours and good friends of each other. First and foremost, Dr. Enrique Crespo, who is the founder and owner of Marietta Chiropractic in Marietta, Georgia. Dr. Crespo is a graduate of Life University with honors, I might add. Very bright doctor and has been practicing there for a number of years. We'll get into your story in a little bit, Dr. Crespo, but thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And then we also have Mr. Rex Burruss. Rex is actually founder and owner of Burris Design and graphic design by trade. The story that you're going to hear today about how Rex came to be here, I think, is a very interesting one. And it's an interesting connection both between Dr. He and Dr. Crespo, and then also between Rex and Sumas Medical Laser. Rex, we're excited to have you. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, fantastic. So why don't we jump right in? And I'd like to start, Dr. Crespo, with you. And I love to hear people's stories. I'm always curious about how folks end up in a profession that they choose to make a career out of. So tell us your story. How did you end up becoming a chiropractor and land in Marietta, Georgia?
Mine is a simple one. I knew for a fact as a young age, to be exact, of 6 years old, when I had asked my mom, I wanted a model, but not just your ordinary model. I wanted a skeleton. So that's what started it all. I knew that I wanted to be a doctor. Which branch, that I didn't know until a couple of years after the fact. I was driving and it was in a nice new sports car. I got rear-ended, thrown into the middle of an intersection and got T-boned. So traditionally followed through on the medical route, did my PT, saw my orthopedist, et cetera, et cetera. And my cousin at the time had said, you've been at this now for 5-6 weeks and you haven't been able to get back in the gym. I think you better change your options. And that's when he introduced me to a sports chiropractor in Jersey, who later on became my mentor, Dr. Pace. And I would have to say within a week and a half, I saw the improvements. And that's what basically started it for me. And everything in life, anything that's important to me, when I hit a crossroad, I pray on it. And I've always said that it's not my will, it's his. And one thing led to another. And Dr. Pace was so kind enough to write me a letter of recommendation to, at the time in 94, the premier university for chiropractic was the one that was being run by Dr. Sid Williams. And that is here centrally located in Marietta, Georgia. And I graduated in 98. So I've been practicing now over 25 years. And I always tell my kids that he hasn't worked a single day in his life since 98 because I love what I do.
Fantastic. So I was going to ask how you ended up coming from New Jersey to Georgia, but now I know it was Life University. So you attended school there and never left.
That is correct.
Yeah, fantastic. So what have been some of the focuses within your practice, and how has it changed over the years? Were you starting out just a traditional chiropractor in the sense of not using other modalities, just using your hands, or talk to us about that evolution?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, when I got out in practice, I was baptized in fire in an orthopedic facility. And there was an orthopedist at the time who was the team doctor for I do believe it was the Atlanta Thrashers, I do believe. Actually, they were the Atlanta Knights, and then they moved into the Atlanta Thrashers. He wanted an individual who was bilingual and understood sports management, and that was myself. And I learned a lot from him. So I've always been very medically driven in my note-taking and documentation, but I still follow the straight and narrow lasting purpose methodology of chiropractic. Now, within that practice, I saw a plethora of dynamic instruments and modalities, and I had the opportunity to test drive each and every one. So as of 2003, I think one of my first hands-on approaches with any type of laser system had to have been, I do believe it was an Apollo system back in the day, and used it, and very minimal feedback. A lot of times you would have to use it over and over again. I still saw the dynamic differences as opposed to utilizing diathermy or using interferential and such, or even ultrasound. I lean towards that area. And as I left that practice and moved on out on my own, I really took an interest in photobiomodulation, which is just a fancy term for the laser.
So that's a pretty good progression. And then the last time that I visited with you, you had made another kind of evolution in the practice and gotten into regenerative medicine. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that came in July of 2020. And that was an evolution through a dear friend of mine that we recently lost as of December 21st of last year, Dr. Robert Windsor. And during the pandemic, still practiced. I never closed a single day. Of course, my hours were modified. The amount of patients, I was seeing 12 to 15 patients by myself because I lost 3 employees at the time because you had individuals that were scared and some of them even got sick. So I was following the CDC protocols as asked. And lucky for me, my private practice has pretty substantial private parking. So I was using the parking lot as my waiting room. So every time I was done with one patient, I would call the patient next in line, say, hey, the room is available, come on in, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how I developed. So what happened was that I was referring out to my counterparts. I need to refer you to this medical doctor. I need to refer you to this orthopedist or neurologist, et cetera. And the patients would give me the feedback of they're not taking any new patients or the practice is closed temporarily. So I was reciprocating that with Dr. Rob, and he said, I think we need to develop something internally and so we can help those patients. And that's how the integrated side was developed. And we never looked back, really. And it was out of necessity.
It's a really probably one of the best evolutions you've had in the practice, from what I understand. I know it's something you're really passionate about, and we'll get into a little bit of the ways that laser kind of marries up with these regenerative injections. But for those who may not be fully aware of what we mean when we say regenerative medicine, can you help the audience understand a little bit more about it?
Regenerative medicine is when you're basically combining functional medicine with other counterparts. You're trying to help the body, whether it's through the guidance of nutrition in conjunction, let's say, with chiropractic, physical therapy, and the borderline of the medicinal effects of what medicine can assist. It's a one global, one umbrella that is working in unison for the better cause of the patient. I often say, especially with the laser's primary emphasis is to mitigate pain, but it also helps in mitigating inflammation, and it also helps to upregulate tissue regeneration. So by combining all those different facets, you're basically furthering along the effects of regeneration within the body. But the more you get involved on something like that's more of a wheelhouse that medical personnel would dictate exclusively.
And so do you still partner with the MD community? Do you have someone on staff who carries that side of the business?
Yes, absolutely. Our medical director is a renowned anesthesiologist by the name of Dr. Leslie Pace. We also have a resident PA on staff. That would be Daniel McCarthy. And then obviously our nurse practitioner, who is Jeremy Adams. And again, they basically come in when we basically hit a plateau with our patients. So once it's like always, when you're dealing with a case, every case is different. Try to work with what you have. But if you come to a point, now it's time to do the referral. And then you do the referral out to that individual based on medical necessity, to assist the patient in improving their overall quality of life.
Absolutely. So would you say that the majority of the time that you're employing the laser as a modality, that you're also looking at the opportunity for things such as stem cell injection or PRP and things of that nature, or is it less common for those two to be paired together?
Again, everything is based on medical necessity, and that's more of a wheelhouse based on what the medical personnel will dictate. I'm not the one who dictates, but when the patient gets to a certain plateau, then it's up to you to basically do the recommendation or the outsource outbound.
Sure. Okay. Makes sense. So then you also mentioned nutritional counseling, and I'm curious about that and how you use nutritional guidance and or any supplementation that you recommend to your patients to assist them in their healing process or maintaining, keeping low levels of inflammation and things of that nature. Can you touch on that a little bit?
We're in a society that not everybody's eating cleaner, like I paraphrase it, right? Not everybody's drinking enough water. Not everybody is exercising. Not everybody is getting out and dynamically getting your natural vitamin D from the sun. So I try to encourage patients on the importance of paying attention to that because that's part of quality of life and helping them in making their guidance based on their necessity. I don't sell products in my practice. I never had vitamins or supplement aid, et cetera. But again, it's through the guidance of understanding the nutritional value and why is it that you're not sleeping or why is it that you're having all these other complexities. There is something else missing. Something so simple as a multivitamin.
Perfect. Okay, good. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, whether they are a potential healthcare provider, a peer of yours, or a patient consumer who's curious about what you're doing, how can they get in touch with you?
Our direct webpage is MariettaChiropractic.com. We're centrally located in Marietta. We also have social media sites, Facebook and Instagram. And our direct number to the office is 770-428-4909. I repeat, 770-428-4909.
Perfect. Excellent. So I'm sure your phone's about to be ringing off the hook. Okay, let's switch gears for a second. And Rex, let's say hi to you. I know you've got an incredibly interesting, challenging story that has thankfully come to a happy, positive conclusion. Give us the Cliff Note version of your story, and then ultimately how you came to know Dr. Crespo.
Okay, let's start with December 30th of 2016. I left my design studio, which is, as you mentioned, rexburrusdesign.com, and run downstairs to a new restaurant for lunch. Now, I practiced in a building that dates to 1907, I believe. It's in the historic district in Avondale Estates, Georgia. So this new restaurant was very exciting. A young couple had purchased and had moved into the space. I went in and sat at the luncheon counter and ordered my lunch. And I remember it arriving. And I just had appetizers. I thought, no, they're new, not terribly exciting, but it'll get better. I remember tasting my appetizer. That's the last thing I remember. I collapsed across the bar. And the gentleman seated to my right apparently poked me in the shoulder, aroused me, and said, "Sir, you can't sleep here." I'm told, I have no memory of it, I'm told that I raised up, looked at him, and said, "It's okay. I know the owner. She won't mind." At which point I collapsed into the floor and went into convulsions. I had left ventricular rupture, so my heart had literally exploded. I'd blown a hole in the left chamber of my heart. The owner of the restaurant rushed out, sat in the floor with me, and tried to massage my chest to stop me from convulsing. Called to her husband, who was the chef, and asked him to bring sugar, assuming that perhaps I was a diabetic, and trying anything possible because, as she told me later, oh my God, if someone died in my restaurant, we were open them up, we'd lose our life savings. So I remember nothing of this. I woke very briefly in an ambulance, being told that I had collapsed, didn't have any idea of what year it was, and was told that they were taking me to the Class 4 Trauma Center in Atlanta. And my response was, no, I have insurance. Take me here instead. No, we're going to go ahead and take you here. I have no memory beyond that. That afternoon at Grady, they performed a procedure to remove the blood that had pooled in my chest cavity and transferred me over to St. Joseph's, which is a major heart hospital in Atlanta. When I arrived there, I was through 2 open heart surgeries, flatlined on them repeatedly, and was placed into a coma, an induced coma, for 3 days. However, at 3 days' time, they couldn't rouse me. So I remained in a coma for 3.5 weeks. When I woke, I was actually being transferred to another hospital facility, this time to a rehab center. And I woke there. I woke up very briefly, long enough to hear the EMTs. They couldn't speak. I didn't realize they had a tracheotomy in my throat, so I had no knowledge. A couple of days later, when I regained consciousness again, the doctor explained to me what had happened, the rarity of this particular heart attack, that it only happens to men of a certain age, and that usually they die. And in fact, I had, but they had revived me. So I started looking around, not able to move much, and realized that I was significantly smaller than I had been before the heart attack. During the coma, I had dropped about 50 pounds. So yeah, it's very frightening. That and my hair changed colors. When they say that trauma will do it to you, it certainly did. I was advised that during the open heart procedures, vasopressors had been administered, and that the side effect of that was gangrene. When I again started looking at my extremities, I found that a significant portion of right foot and my left foot were both black. In fact, I had developed gangrene, as well as 2 fingers on my left hand. I was facing a pretty harsh journey if I continued to survive. At that point, they recommended multiple amputations, and I sought out a second opinion. Vanity being what it is, coming from a background where I deal with visuals every day, and going back further throughout college and high school and middle school, I've been with a dance company. So I was accustomed to my body looking a certain way. And I knew that if what they were telling me was true, if this was not reversible, that my body would never look like it once had. So we waited for a few weeks. In fact, we were waiting for the gangrene to delineate, and I underwent multiple amputations. So I lost my left leg below knee, about 10 inches above the floor. I lost the distal flanges of 3 toes on my right foot and 2 fingers on my left hand. So obviously, I wasn't ever going to look quite like I used to. However, I had already gone back to work. I taught myself how to walk on a walker, and then on crutches, and then on a cane, and then ultimately to get a prosthesis and to learn to walk again with that. The one thing that I could not overcome, though, my functionality was great, but I was dealing with massive levels of phantom limb pain, which people don't really understand what that is. In fact, they tell us that it is the homunculus portion of the brain which controls all the nerve endings throughout your body. So anything that you were born with, whatever hand you have, and here I mentioned left hand, these aren't real. These are prosthetics. So when I wave my hands around, I think, oh, he's lying. He's got fingers. No, I do, but I paid for it. Anyway, so when the homunculus is sending out signals down your spine, down your nerve, to say your leg in my case, and it does not receive a message back saying, hey, I'm fine, the brain responds with pain. And that pain is centralized in the area where that nerve ending is. Now, the nerve ending for me is now further up my leg. It's not complete, but where that nerve ends is in what would have once been my calf. So the pain is centered down further down my leg. For instance, for me, it manifested as either pressure. So I felt like I had my foot, which no longer exists, under a steamroller constantly. The other thing that would happen would be a sensation of a railroad spike being driven into my calf, which didn't exist. So this was pretty constant, waking screaming at night, trying to drive to work and getting there and being in massive pain and being at the point where I would have to turn around and come back home and try to take the painkillers that the doctor had prescribed, but realistically, they weren't working for me. So I had given up and come to reality, or at least in my mind, reality that I would have to live with pain forever because the medications were simply not working. Beyond that, they were interrupting my ability to complete a coherent sentence. So I would lose a word in the middle of a sentence when I'm speaking with my clients and go chasing after that word only to find I had lost the entire train of thought. So the only option for me was to live with the pain and to give up the medications because the medications were not working with my biology. And this is where I was. However, I'm also a member of a group called the Amputee Coalition. Their local branch is the Amputee Foundation of Greater Atlanta. And that's a peer support group for people with limb loss or limb difference. Well, as I was speaking to the executive director, she mentioned, hey, I've got this sports chiropractor that I've been talking to. He has a device that he wants to try with amputees. I said, have you tried it? And she said, I have. I don't really have phantom pain, though. She was involved in a motorcycle accident and lost her right leg above knee, but she had crushed other parts of her body. So she had sustained multiple breaks. It was pretty horrific. But she said, my problems are in other parts of my body. I really don't deal with phantom pain. So I've recommended him to you because I'd like you to go out and meet him and see if this in fact works. We had spoken with several people who had other versions of treatments for people with limb pain, often involving nerve stimulation that was subcutaneous. And I'd heard nightmare stories of infections from filaments that were as thin as human hairs going through the skin to reach to a nerve ending to try to stimulate it. I wasn't willing to do anything that was transdermal. I just didn't want to take any chances with that. So I called Dr. Crespo, heard a little bit about what he was doing with Sumas lasers, and went out and met with him. And I was absolutely overwhelmed. His results were instantaneous. So for me, he had taken this pain that I had expected that I would live with forever. And literally that afternoon, I found relief from it. So it was miraculous to me.
And how long after your amputation surgery was your first treatment with Dr. Crespo?
I would say a year and a half after.
Oh boy, so you dealt with that for that long.
Massive levels of pain for a year and a half.
And how common is it for anyone to suffer any type of amputation surgery to deal with what you dealt with, this phantom limb pain or residual limb pain?
They say that 90% of us will experience it at one point or another. So it's not really a question of when, not if, but when. So I've talked to people who have been amputees for 40 years and have had no phantom limb pain and suddenly started experiencing what I'd been telling them I was not.
Interesting. So a year and a half after surgery, you have your first laser treatment. How many sessions do you recall having? And do you still get laser treatments today?
For the first couple of months, I was seeing Dr. Crespo for, I think it was twice a week. And he continued on. Of course, we know that people who've experienced limb loss are more prone to barometric pressure shifts. Living in Atlanta, when it rains hard, typically I can tell about 2 to 3 days before we start to get a heavy rain that it's coming. So I will start to experience phantom pain again. And that's when I call Dr. Crespo and get an appointment, go in and spend some time with him and his staff. So it's a PRN issue now as needed.
Got it. And Dr. Crespo, anything you would add to what Rex's treatment plan had been or has been? Anything in addition to the laser that you've been doing?
No, everything is pretty consistent. It all falls under your typical neuropathy program. And again, this goes back to what I had said prior. If you have certain appliances in place, certain pieces of equipment in place that basically complement each other, and you combine them, what are you doing? You're basically augmenting care. So if you're already helping the patient at that point, there's no need for the next step, which will be medical intervention. Like now, going back to Rex's case, it was pretty much straight shot. I think it was the first treatment. He felt, he was dynamically walking me through what he felt. And everything from, oh my gosh, I feel that at the bottom of my toes. And I'm looking down and I'm not seeing anything. So that's where the dynamic started, the so-called wheels started spinning in my head. Because let's face it, to start to review the ongoing current theories of phantom limb pain, we're going to have to add another hour to the show. Okay. But for our audience to get a visual representation on how I derived at it, it's almost if you were to plant a little seed in a little pot, right? And then all of a sudden the seed starts to germinate. And now you have a small little plant. That small little plant starts to get bigger and bigger. And now you're saying to yourself, you know what? This plant is outgrowing the pot. And if you ever notice that when you start breaking up that soil and you remove that little pot away from that plant, you notice how the root system is so intricate that it actually took the mold of the pot. That's what I want all our listeners to visualize on the ability of our brain in the development of the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, all those little nerve endings that make up who you are. You could actually mimic your whole body to the T, okay? But now when you have an amputation, you're basically are cutting that one piece out physically, but in the neurological aspect, in the nervous system aspect, the brain still sees it as a whole.
Right.
And the day that I had the epiphany was when I had a patient that came in through one of the chapters. And I assumed this lady was come here to see me for either phantom limb pain or residual limb pain. Because again, that's what the laser is FDA approved for, is pain, right? So right away, I assumed that, hey, so where is your residual limb pain? Excuse me? Okay, where is your phantom limb pain? What is that? So she wasn't there for that. She was seeing me for something completely unrelated. It was just shoulder pain. And that's where I had that epiphany that makes sense, because she was congenitally born that way. She was, in other words, she was an AK, right? She was missing a limb above the knee. So those little nerve endings never manifested in that shape or in that form. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely. That's a great visual. So Rex, really happy, so happy that you got relief. And I know now that we've talked about this a few times, you're really helping to spread awareness within the patient community. These folks who are either hopefully members of the Amputee Coalition or the local chapter in Atlanta, which you said was the Amputee Foundation. So tell us a little bit about the Amputee Coalition and how people can get in touch with them if they've suffered an amputation and they maybe don't know about this organization. Maybe help shed a little light on that.
Sure. The Amputee Coalition is the largest organization for people with limb loss or limb difference, either acquired limb loss or congenital limb difference. So you're born without a part, as Dr. Crespo said, or some issue in your life has brought about the need for limb loss. I believe that there are currently, 4.6 million people in the United States who live with limb loss or limb difference. Now, I say that with a caveat. The studies don't really include the military community, and they don't include people who do not have insurance. So those numbers are just from people who have filed insurance claims. So they've sought medical assistance. So that's the number we're currently dealing with. If I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit higher, but we know that it is substantially higher when you look at people who are uninsured or people who are military. So it's a substantial community. Through the organization, we have a lot of services that go out to individuals, social services, personal services, community services. They have a lot of peer support groups that meet all over the country, either in person or online. Some do hybrid meetings, such as we do here in Atlanta. So some of our members are coming in and meeting with us at Emory University's Rehabilitation Hospital, or they're coming in via a social media platform, which is very handy. So, for example, we have some people who they live just a little bit too far away and they just can't get it here in time for a meeting in person. So they come in remotely like we're doing right now. We do try and get together as often as possible and go and have dinner. We have a group going out next month. You'll like this. You are Sumas, they are Summit. We're going to climb rock walls.
Oh, wow.
So here are all these people who are missing one or more limbs, and we're going to be climbing 65-foot rock walls.
Wow. That's tough enough with all four limbs. So
yes,
that should be very challenging.
There's a great organization that works with people who are physically challenged and helps them get up that wall.
I bet it's so good for people's morale and sense of being. How can folks get in touch with the coalition and find out more about it if they don't already know?
Easily. You can log online to amputee-coalition.org.
Okay. amputee-coalition.org. Super. And then would you want to put out any of your personal contact information should anyone want to reach out to you personally?
Sure. One thing about my relationship with Dr. Crespo, I'm so excited about the services that he offers and the success that I have found with the product, that I now design all of his advertising and promotional materials. So that's through rexburrussdesign.com. That's REXBURUSDESIGN.com. And I also do a lot of work for design for the Amputee Coalition, and of course, for the Amputee Foundation of Greater Atlanta.
Fantastic work. I know also the coalition has an annual conference. Do you know the details on that conference for this year?
Sure. It's going to be August 8th through 10th. It's going to be in Atlanta this year. It's going to be at the Hyatt Regency, which is a pretty amazing facility. Through June 24th, there is an early bird discount for registration at amputee-coalition.org. And they had brought together, the first time I attended was in Texas. And so that was 2019, I think. And we had around 1,400 people with limb loss or limb difference in one facility for the weekend. So it was pretty amazing, enormously empowering. There was a gentleman who got onto an elevator at one point and saw my T-shirt, which said, It was a shark, and it said, "Vacation was great. Why'd you ask?" Then you looked down and saw that I was missing a limb and said, "Number one, that's the funniest shirt I've ever seen in my life. And why are there so many people here missing limbs?" So I said, "We have a conference going. It's an annual conference. We move to different cities every summer. And so for one weekend only, you get to be the two-legged freak in the building. So relax and enjoy the ride."
I love it. I love it.
And
Fantastic perspective.
It's an empowering event that lets people know that we are a very strong community. You don't necessarily see many people with limb loss until you've joined it. And then, like buying that fancy red sports car you've always wanted all your life, you drive out of the parking lot, pull up to the first stoplight thinking, "I've got the only one," and another one pulls up right beside you.
Really good. Boy, what a great story, and what a fantastic, and obviously wouldn't be possible without you, Dr. Crespo. So I'm sure, Rex, that you're indebted to Dr. Crespo for the rest of your life. And hopefully with this show spreading all over the world, we can reach someone else who may be dealing with some of the same things you did, Rex, and find someone like Dr. Crespo who can help them out with the power of laser. As we wrap up, I just want to remind everybody to check us out at sumislaser.com. Find out about the actual devices that Dr. Crespo has used on Mr. Rex. And then also check out our new dynamic light therapy bed site, and that's VITA, VITA.sumislaser.com. Gentlemen, I really have to thank both of you so much for everything you've done to help Sumis. And we're so happy that we've been a part of your journey, Rex, to help you relieve yourself from that discomfort. So thanks again so much. You have a fantastic weekend to both of you, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Thank you for joining us on LaserLife Insights. This show is brought to you by Sumis Medical Laser, revolutionizing laser therapy to heal with the power of light. For more information, go to sumislaser.com.